Welcome to Climate Plus, a DevX podcast. I'm Michael Igo, senior reporter at DevX. Every year, usually around this time, the world turns its attention to climate change and what we're doing, or not doing, about it. At the UN Climate Conference, or COP, negotiators get deep into the weeds on every aspect of the climate crisis. This year, it's happening in Dubai. To help make sense of this complex, critical moment, we're bringing you conversations with leading climate thinkers, activists, and experts, and asking them, can COP28 deliver?
It's very important to have this global approach and for MDBs to work together with the country on the policy and then the financing of projects.
The Paris Climate Agreement is an agreement between countries, but it's also much more than that. It's a call to action for leaders and institutions across society to take a hard look at what they might be doing to contribute to climate change and what they can do to be part of the solution. You don't have to look any further than COP28, which saw a record number of attendees from across the globe, to see that these annual conferences have become a center of gravity for people trying to align themselves and their organizations with climate action. For multilateral development banks, Paris alignment has become a rallying cry and an explicit commitment. But now, these institutions that are at the center of the climate finance puzzle have to figure out what it really means to align their operations, their strategies, and their balance sheets with the goals of the Paris Agreement. My colleague Adva Saldinger spoke with Odile Renaud-Basso, who's the president of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, during our DevX Climate Plus event on the sidelines of COP28 in Dubai. This episode was recorded live with questions submitted from our online audience.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for this live recording of DevX's Climate Plus podcast. My name is Adva Saldinger, and I'm joined by Odile Renaud-Basso, who's the president of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Odile, thanks so much for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you for the invitation.
I want to start by talking about your climate priorities. We've seen a lot of announcements at COP28 from multilateral development banks talking about their climate plans and ways they might work together. What have been your priorities this week, and what are your priorities coming out of COP? How are you as an institution looking to align with the Paris climate goals?
So EBRD has very clear climate priorities. The first one is an objective we set already few years ago in 2020, which was 2019, which is to have 50% of our investment in the green sector to support the green transition by 2025. And we already reached that objective 2 years ago, and we will remain at this level very likely in 2023. So this is 50% of our investment in support of the green transition, and the bulk of it is to support finance for climate. The second very important policy tool we have, an objective we have, is since the beginning of this year to ensure that all our investments are Paris aligned. So we look at each and every project and we check that they are consistent with the objective of Paris Agreement, so the objective of the 1.5 degrees. And it means that we look at every project with two sort of lens. The first one is adaptation, so looking at our investment and saying whether they can stand for increase of temperature of 1.5, and the other thing is mitigation, how they contribute or whether they are consistent with the objective of reducing the gas emission. So this is something we implement in all our projects. We are the first MDB implementing it on all our investment, but we work on the basis of a common methodology among MDBs. So for the COP, our objective were really to make further progress on the delivery and on working with our countries of operation in order to accelerate how they can reduce gas emission, improve the energy efficiency of the economies, and so forth. And doing that at our level as a multilateral development with our countries of operation, but also with our partner bank, the other MDBs, and working with MDBs as a system. One of the big deliverables for us was really this work we do on country platform, because we believe that to deal with climate and to deal with the green transition, it's very important to go beyond a project-by-project approach. This is a huge challenge. Being able to address this challenge implies to have very global policies, encompassing policies, be it on the energy strategy, but also on sectoral development and so forth. So it's very important to have this global approach and for MDBs to work together with the country on the policy and then the financing of projects.
I want to ask a little bit more about delivery because EIB President Werner Hoyer earlier this week said it's time for MDBs to actually step up the action. And I think that's one of the questions a lot of people have coming out of an event like COP. There have been a lot of announcements, and maybe we can talk about some of those a little bit later. But I think people aren't necessarily seeing the action following up on some of these commitments and announcements. So what does delivery mean at EBRD? How does that make projects look different? How does that change your operations?
So delivery means really, for us, implementing what we have committed to do and working with the countries in which we invest in order to accompany them really in this green transition. I will take one example of what I consider as delivery. Last year, we launched with Egypt in COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh a big program which is called Nouefe, so the nexus for water, energy, and food in Egypt, which is a country platform led by Egypt with a strong commitment from Egyptian authorities, and which defines a very clear strategy on energy, on food, and on water. We were in charge of the energy. EBRD is in charge of the energy pillar, and we worked very heavily with the government in order to define the strategy and then to implement it. What is the strategy? It's very simple. Egypt now is using and producing electricity using gas, and they have in a very inefficient manner. So they have inefficient gas-fired power plant. We managed to convince the government that it was in their interest to decommission this inefficient gas power plant, which are very, highly polluting and so forth. In order, it gives them the capacity to export this gas. Egypt needs a lot of foreign exchange revenues. They need export revenues. So this will help the country in macroeconomic terms. And Egypt has also a huge potential in renewable. They have a huge space for solar, for wind energy, and so forth. So the plan is to decommission 5 gigawatts of gas power plant and to invest in 10 gigawatts of renewable. To do that, Egypt needs also to accompany the closing up and the phasing out of the gas for this power plant in a just transition, so to help the people working there to find something else, to be reskilled, and so forth. This is a very important component. The second component where Egypt needs some concessional financing is to finance the grid. To have 10 gigawatts of renewable and to put it in the energy sector, you need to have grid connection and so forth, and this is quite important investment at public sector level. So to do that, we brought donor support from Germany. They financed with a debt swap. They provided concessional financing from US, from France, from the EU Commission, and other partners, 500 million of concessional financing. Then we believe the financing of the renewable will be done by including private sector, IFIs like us, IFC, 10 billion of investment are expected. And so this was the plan announced last year. This year, we already have a clear investment plan for the grid. So it's now defined by the energy minister with a clear plan. We have invested already to support 1.8 gigawatt of renewable, and the first two power plants, gas power plants, will be closed in the first quarter of 2014. So this is what I call delivery. And it's very concrete. It's a plan, a strategy, and then we implement it with financing, but also with policy support. Another example I can give is the work we've been doing with North Macedonia. North Macedonia has announced in the COP Just Energy Transition Initiative platform, investment platform. North Macedonia has just committed to close all its coal power plants, and coal represents 40%, a bit more than 40% of the energy supply of the electricity supply, in North Macedonia. It will be closed by 2030. It's a loss of job for 6,000 people, so this will have to be supported. There are also reskilling, retraining, and so forth. And 1.7 or 1.8 gigawatt of renewable will be developed. So the strategy is clearly endorsed. We will get some financing with concessional support from the Green Climate Fund, and then we will finance and with others the development of renewable and so forth. So I think that's for me, that's what means implementation and the role MDB can play, because we have this big convening power where we can help the government in defining plans, bring donors funding for the or green funds, international, either the Climate Investment Fund or the Green Climate Fund, in order to provide concessional financing, and then use our own balance sheet in order to finance the project.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about that, because we did see, a joint statement from the MDBs, and we have seen a number of other sort of smaller groupings of MDBs make commitments and announcements to work together. I'm curious how that is operationally working differently, because I think they've often said, yeah, we should work better together, but is that actually changing? Are you adopting the same metrics, the same due diligence processes to make things more streamlined? Are you adopting or sharing country strategies so you avoid duplication of efforts and align better with government priorities and sort of, work off of a similar playbook so you're not competing with one another or duplicating efforts with what really is limited pool of capital?
So first of all, there is, in particular on the climate green area, a lot of cooperation on among MDBs about methodology. And this is, we have a common approach to Paris alignment. We have a common approach to climate measuring, climate financing. We have now agreed on common principle for nature, nature positive investment. So all this is very important in order of having same sort of approach and common principle, but this is not enough. And I believe that there are two areas where we need to go beyond. First of all is this country platform approach, where you have a sort of lead institution doing the policy work and then the others investing together. For example, on Egypt, on the investment of renewable, IFC had project, but they are all related to the same platform. So different institutions then can use the different balance sheet in order to invest, but based on the same sort of program, which is very much led by the country. The second element is the point you were mentioning on standards and mutual reliance. And this is an area you may have seen that appears to be one of the priority among MDBs to work on that. And to explore, either to have more common standards or to use more mutual reliance, which is having a lead institution. And then if we are doing some co-financing, rely on the application of their standards. we are not starting from scratch. We already have this concept of lead institution, having, for example, joint studies on all the environmental and social impact studies. We have often one set of studies, but still we may have different approach to these studies. So mutual reliance would be a step forward. It cannot be necessarily applied with everybody, because we have different business models, but we will try to do our best.
Climate Plus is supported by the World Bank. Back in October, World Bank President Ajay Banga called for a new vision for ending poverty on a livable planet, with a focus on climate action.
We cannot endure another period of emission-heavy growth. We must find a way to finance a different world where our climate is protected, where pandemics are manageable, if not preventable, where food is abundant and fragility and poverty are defeated. We do not suffer from a shortage of solutions. We're just paralyzed by a persistent lack of courage to pursue them. The good news is that we have solutions like these within reach and resources at our disposal to scale them.
To learn more about efforts to end poverty on a livable planet, search for the World Bank Group at COP28 or click the link in the show notes.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the draft energy sector policy that EBRD released earlier this year. I want to sort of understand where things stand with that. And one of the things that you talk about in that policy is phasing out fossil fuels. And I'm curious, what does that timeline look like? And, what happens if EBRD sort of stops all investments in fossil fuels?
So the energy strategy is going to be approved next week. So it's still in the making. We had consultation, but now it's really in the final phase. And the clear objective is to support the green transition. So this is the overwhelming objective of the energy strategy, to accompany the green transition through massive investment in renewable. And I think on that, I can come back to that later, but we really, on this activity, bring together policy work, so working with government on how to get the best price, how to structure the development of renewable in the most effective manner. And we've been working with 14 countries to develop auction framework. So that because we are really convinced, and this is also supported by evidence, that this is the best way to get the best price of electricity. And so we are working with them, in the different, very different countries, in order to set what is the regulatory framework, legal framework, in order to get that up and running. And we finance afterwards. The next step is to finance a project, but also others could also finance projects. So this is important to create a pipeline of investable project, and renewable can also be an area of interest for private investment, because the developers are private and they can have access to private funding. The second big element is, of course, developing alternative source of beyond renewable, sustainable gas and sustainable, as like hydrogen, biofuel, and so forth.
I guess on that question, right? People have been talking about green hydrogen. I'm curious how viable you think that is as an option in the potential energy mix going forward. It seems like it may be, years down the road, especially for the sort of lowest income countries, for that to be viable. Where do you think things stand?
No, I think it has a very important potential. It's still expensive, and we are still at the early stage of developing green hydrogen. But there is really, I think it will have a very important role to play for the hard-to-abate sector and so forth. So it will be needed in the future. And you see already a number of private investors very much interested into and investing, developing concrete project with hydrogen, and a number of countries very much much interested, in particular, for it to be one key condition for it to work is to have a lot, cheap renewable energy available. So that's why it's a very important potential, I think, for all, for example, South Mediterranean countries, Morocco, countries like Egypt are very, Mauritania have a strong interest into that kind of investment because of the potential in terms of cheap renewable. And then I think it's still, we are expecting development. It's a bit like the renewable at the beginning. It was much more expensive, much more challenging, and then with the need you scale up. There are some technological improvement, and then it becomes very, very efficient. So we are very confident. We are looking into that. We are helping countries to define their hydrogen strategies. That's the case for Egypt, and working on concrete project in a pilot project in Egypt, for example, in this area.
I wanted to ask about
on the question of fossil fuel.
We can go back to
We have already had a fossil fuel strategy which exclude any investment from EBRD in upstream fossil fuel, be it oil and gas, and is very restrictive on what we can do in midstream and the use of gas. So to be, and now the conditions are very, for us to be able to do a project in this area, are very stringent, in the sense that we need to show that it's Paris aligned, so that we will not create stranded assets. And we will also, and that's an additional requirement moving forward, we will also have to show that our investment in a gas-related project is helpful, has a positive impact, accelerate the green transition. I will take you, we have in the last 2 years financed only 2 projects having a connection with gas, involving gas. The first one is an investment in district heating in Almaty, so Central Asia. And it's a very cold city, and now they have a highly polluting coal power system. So extremely, you go in Almaty in winter, you feel, and you see the air, it's terrible. And it's very difficult for district heating in such an area to have something else than gas. So we supported the transition from coal to gas for the district heating. And this has allowed to reduce 50% of the pollution related to improve substantially the air quality, improve health condition, and reduce emission. So this is the kind of project that we will still have the capacity to support, but very on a sort of exceptional basis, very targeted. But what we are trying to do on the other side is really to help our countries to get out of coal. And I mentioned the example of North Macedonia. We have another project in Morocco with the energy company ONI, where we provide them some liquidity support because of they need some refinancing for their debt and so forth, but with very clear condition about acceleration of the phasing out of some coal power plant. And in relation to this project, we worked with the Moroccan government on their net zero announcement. So the government announced a net zero target in the COP. So this is the kind of approach we really want to have and to deploy. And we are working in countries which are still very dependent on coal. For example, in the Western Balkans, which is a region where we operate still, 70% of the energy comes from fossil fuel. So there is a lot of work to do, but we are very committed to do that and to take into account each situation and find the appropriate solution to accelerate.
Do you see a timeline or a point in time down the road that EBRD makes no fossil fuel related investments, and how soon or how quickly do you think you get there? It's
what we need. What is important is not so much what we do, but how we can best help our countries to get out of fossil fuel, because and that's why the point I was saying, we do 400 projects per year. So 800 projects over 2 years, and we had 2 projects involving fossil fuel. So I think that we need to put, it's already extremely marginal.
The context.
Sorry,
the context is important.
Yeah, but I think that what is really important is to have the tools, also relevant tools, in order to help our countries getting out of it, and that's why I mean we have this approach, which is very ambitious, but also taking the situation country by country and finding the appropriate solution. One important dimension, for example, we will have a strong focus on methane. You know, the methane pledge, and we were very happy that Kazakhstan, and we worked a lot with them for that, announced that they joined the methane pledge. Methane emission in Kazakhstan represent almost 20% of their gas emission. So it's a huge contribution. And I mean, we would not exclude to finance project that will have as an impact to reduce this methane emission. I think that would make sense. I mean, the bottom line is what is really important is what the countries are doing.
Yeah. We talked a little bit about green hydrogen, but I want to talk about another type of energy that is often, I think, a bit controversial, which is nuclear energy. And we saw, I think 20 plus countries come together in a declaration at COP to triple nuclear energy. And that declaration actually included language that encourages the World Bank and other MDBs and international financial institutions to include nuclear in their lending. And so I'm curious if EBRD will do that. Is that something that you're discussing or considering, is investing in nuclear energy?
So EBRD has always been investing in nuclear, but for the safety dimension, the decommissioning and the safety. You know that we were the MDB implementing the shelter on Chernobyl. So it was a huge endeavor with a huge amount of financing. So we have technical expertise on financing decommissioning and this kind of safety measures. Now we are working with some countries in, for example, Kazakhstan to deal with these decommissioning issues and management of fossil fuel material and so forth to be, when you close these kind of facilities. We have had in our board, in the discussion of the energy strategy, some exchange, because of course there are some countries which are supporting, willing MDBs to invest. Our situation is the following. Our tools and financial specificities, because we are a bank which is mainly focusing on the private sector, with 75% of our focus in the private sector. Our assessment is that we are not the right tool to finance very large nuclear projects costing several billions and which are very sovereign nature with a very long-term financing needs. So this is not really, we are not the relevant institution to do that. What shareholders decided, it's to be discussed to be confirmed in the next when they approve the final strategy, is that we will monitor the development of the nuclear energy sector and see whether then, and we are in touch. We work closely with the Atomic Energy Agency. For example, I met Mr. Grossi in COP. So to monitor what are the development, for example, for SMR, what's going on, whether this is more, something which could be relevant for MDBs, but this is, the only, for the time being, where we stand.
Thanks. You talked about this earlier, about how you're sort of taking an approach that goes well beyond your energy sector strategy and really incorporating sort of Paris alignment and climate targets throughout all of your projects. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about what that looks like, because you do a lot of infrastructure projects, right? You fund a lot of infrastructure, and that can have often a big carbon footprint. We know carbon footprint associated with cement and steel and all the components that often go into infrastructure projects. And so I'm curious what that looks like as you're sort of thinking through the sort of, how do you build infrastructure that will be adaptable? How do you ensure that you're sort of reducing the emissions of the work that you are doing? Is that clauses in the contract? Is that, in the investment decision-making process. How is that evaluated, and how are you putting that into practice sort of in other sectors outside of energy?
So it's a complex assessment, taking into account a number of factors. Also, because what makes it complex is that the objective is not to be net zero today, but to have a trajectory that brings us to a situation compatible with the Paris Agreement. So as I was saying, we look at 2 dimensions for infrastructure adaptation. So to be sure, to see whether to check that the plans are taking into account the climate risk, flood risk, or whatever nature of drought and so forth. So this is more a technical assessment about and the impact of taking that into account. I think is to increase sometimes the cost of the project, so as to have a solution proof for the evolution of the climate. And the second point is looking whether the investment is compatible with the objective of reducing carbon emission and so forth. And then we look very much, we take the project per se, but also its positioning into the country strategy, because it needs to be, developing countries, for example, they need to be able to develop some mode. They need to have infrastructure. We try to support as much as possible clean infrastructure, for example, looking at ensuring that if road is built, it's compatible with EV vehicle, may have charging integrated already. The best solution, or we will focus more on rail, for example, than on road, and looking into the role of this investment into the country strategy as a whole, compatibility with a national determined contribution, and so forth. So it's quite a complex process. There is an element of judgment. It's not, you always have to make assumption and make a judgment call. But this is what we are doing. We have dedicated teams looking at each and every project with this sort of analysis.
One of the things I wanted to ask you,
if I may be looking beyond infrastructure and beyond project by project, what we are trying to do also is bringing, for example, we work a lot with financial institutions. So 1/3 of our financing goes through banks in the countries in which we invest. And we are really working with these banks in order to ensure that themselves take into account this green transition objective as a core of their mandate. So we have some sort of programs to enhance their governance, to ensure that they themselves define the objective of Paris alignment and implement that in their own objective, governance structure, incentive, and so forth. This has a very transformational element, because it's not only our money, which has an impact, but it's also the way we involve partners in this respect. And we try to do that also in the manufacturing sector.
Right. And in fact, we saw an announcement earlier at COP with the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero and a number of other partners looking to sort of improve that technical assistance space for financial institutions, particularly in low-income countries, so that those financial institutions can, better access the, types of technical assistance that you're providing, that others are providing, so they understand where to go for the types of skills or trainings that they need to be able to be more Paris aligned, to be more climate smart in their investments. So I thought that was, we'll see where that goes, but an interesting development that clearly is something that seems like you're aligned with and thinking about as well.
Yes, and that's exactly what we are trying to do. And also we have some green credit lines, which we distribute through the banks. And so the bank provides the credit, and we provide technical assistance in order to help SMEs to take this dimension into account. Because what we realize, and I've seen some studies we've been doing on our countries of operation, is that the awareness and the capacities of SMEs in less advanced countries or middle-income countries to take into account that is extremely, is relatively low. So we really need to accelerate if you want to have a real impact. You need, to ensure that at all levels, this is taken into account in the investment choice, in the decision with the clients. And so we developed this green credit line. It's a form of blended finance because we got grant money to do that. And sometimes we also manage to create an incentive for the clients with a lower interest rate so that they invest in green and also have the tools in order to choose the best solution, know how to go about it.
Hi, I'm Kate Warren, Executive Editor at DevEx. If you are listening to this podcast, you are likely working to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. But are you subscribed to DevEx Newswire? Global development can be a fast-moving, complex sector. Our team of global reporters work every day to bring you the news you need to make sense of it all. In DevEx Newswire, we keep you up to date on issues ranging from climate change financing to gender equality and global health to transforming the food system, all in a fun-to-read, free newsletter delivered directly to you 5 days a week. Join the hundreds of thousands of global development professionals who receive DevEx Newswire and visit devex.com/newsletters to sign up to this free newsletter today.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about, which has been discussed, and I know a number of MDBs have sort of adopted, is this idea of a sort of climate-related debt pause clause in their contract. So the idea being that if a country suffers, a negative climate event, that their loans coming from an MDB would be paused as they look to recover from that. And I'm curious, I think EBRD has said that this is something that you're going to do, and I'm curious, what will that look like? Will it be in every, contract? Is it, apply across the board? Is it only to the principal? Is it also to the interest payment? I think people have a lot of questions about how these sort of debt clause pauses might work.
So first of all, because we have 70% of our activity in the private sector, and for the private sector, our private clients, we already had a lot of flexibility in order to adjust whenever they have been affected by external catastrophe. Whatever it, and we applied that, of course, very importantly in COVID, which is not climate-related event, but which was a big event for everybody. But we also apply it when there is a drought, or flood, earthquake, and this kind of disaster, which may have an impact on a region. So we provide very easily, postponing, restructuring, new money, so tools in order to all kind of measure that allows the client to, get ahead and have some breathing space in order to deal with the challenge. It was much more challenging and not applied before for the public sector, the sovereign, because of the MDB preferred creditor status and so forth. But there have been a lot of work being done by different MDBs on that. And so now we announce that we will apply also for our sovereign and public non-sovereign, so municipalities, local client, state-owned enterprise, this kind of automatic debt suspension and postponement for in relation with an event, natural disaster. It has to be qualified by the authorities as a substantial national disaster, so it can be local, but it needs to be recognized as a very important event with sufficient impact. Serious gravity, and we will apply that to new law on an automatic basis. It would give 2 years postponement of the repayment. And we will start applying because we need to change the contract and so forth at mid-2024. So we believe that this is an important step to, can be helpful for the countries or the municipalities or state-owned clients, and we will see. We will also see what the others are doing and stand ready to, to see whether this is how it's working and so forth. We'll monitor the situation. We are not in a, to be fair, everybody will be, it's likely to be affected by some natural disaster. We are not, our region is a bit less prone to that, but we still see some. We've seen a lot of earthquake, of course, not related to climate, but still having a huge impact. And floods and drought are a risk for our region.
Great. Turning to the sort of, you've mentioned a few times that 70% of your work is in the private sector side. And obviously a key discussion at COP is really about private capital mobilization. And I think, I've been writing about development finance for about a decade now, and I think that there are, some legitimate criticisms that MDBs are not doing enough to mobilize private capital, that they're not mobilizing enough, that sometimes they're mobilizing each other rather than private investors to come to the table. And so I'm curious how you think that MDBs can change that. Do you need to adjust your risk appetite? Do you need to provide more de-risking instruments? Is it a policy problem, an instrument problem? Where do you think MDBs should be focusing their efforts? Is it sort of upstream project pipeline creation? Is it, creating the enabling environment? I'm curious what you think can really unlock this. I think it's a really big question a lot of people are grappling with, and I'd be curious your take on what it'll actually take, especially in low-income countries to get, or lower middle-income countries to get the private sector involved in climate investing, because I think there is often an appetite there, but a disconnect.
So I think you said it all. I think we need to do, it's a multi-dimensional objective. It's the first thing we can do to facilitate private sector investment in emerging and developing countries is to work on the business environment to ensure that the investment climate is attractive and that there are investment opportunities. So working on the pipeline, working also on the policies. If the government has a clear policy, clear strategy, for example, to develop renewable, or this gives some signal for investors that, and confidence in the fact that this will be, the credibility of the plan is absolutely clear to create this kind of confidence and investment appetite. So global environment, rule of law, everything related to rule of law, implementation of contracts, quality of the environment is absolutely fundamental. And this is key in the work we are doing. The second thing is project preparation, pipeline of project. And that's why I believe this country platform is so important, because also it gives visibility and it gives really a strategy to prepare projects. And the third element is financing, how to bring more private sector. And on that, there is one not single solution. And it's important to also, for the private sector, to have realistic expectation. Very often you hear some large international banks saying, we would like to do this kind of investment. We have trillions to invest, but we want only investment grade. We cannot invest in non-investment grade bonds. And I don't think that it's realistic that there could be massive guarantees in order to bring low-rated countries to investment grade through MDB balance sheet. I think that's, very unlikely. But there are a lot of things that can be done because there are investors with different risk appetite. For example, we are working with with ILX, which is creating a link between pension funds, which are long-term investment perspective, managing pension of people who wants to have a sustainable ESG dimension in the investment. And so this fund is doing the go-between between MDBs and pension fund. And there is some appetite to invest in parallel with MDBs in what is called B loans in order to, with scale consistent with the overall risk appetite and so forth, but in order to bring this ESG dimension. And so that's one thing we are developing. We are also working with insurance companies on unfunded risk participation in order they have some appetite to take some risk and cover part of a risk so that we can lend more and be covered for a part with some risk insurance companies. We are also working on innovative blending instrument using a donor fund. For example, we have signed a project with Germany where they provide us 30 or 40 million of grants, and this will allow us to provide the first loss guarantee for private sector investment willing to. So we are working on all this kind of initiative. The big challenge, I will be honest, I mean, it's how to scale that up and how to find the right match. But I think we see that as a key priority. We are not starting from nowhere. When we look at our mobilization ratio, and this appears, for example, in the MDB report on climate finance, for EBRD, for each euro invested, we mobilize directly or indirectly 1.5 euros of private investment. So it's more than double. It's 1.5 for. So it's quite significant, and it has been improving regularly. But I mean, this remains, of course, the big challenge: how to bring more private investors into developing countries. And we are exploring. We are also working with MIGA on solutions. So there is no one size fits all. I think it depends also on the nature of the investment and so forth. So we need to have this toolkit available in order to maximize the impact.
Great. I want to turn quickly to a couple questions that came in. And one is from a company working to develop some innovative, so like renewable energy solutions, sort of repurposing waste heat in some unique ways. And so then they work primarily in sub-Saharan Africa and are sort of trying to understand what's the best way to connect or get financing from EBRD. And another question that's really getting to the sort of multiplicity of interconnected challenges that we see today. So it's not just climate, but it's economic growth and poverty reduction and achieving the SDGs. And they're quite a complex and interconnected set of challenges, really. And they want to get your take on, how you look at that set of challenges and look to address them, not probably singly, but together, and how do you ensure that a focus on one aspect doesn't take away from, a much needed focus in another area?
So the first question, how to access EBRD, it depends whether, you can always it depends on the country and see if we have, if we are operating in the country or not. We are not yet operating in sub-Saharan Africa. It will come, we will start in 6 countries in 2025, but otherwise you can always send something at the EBRD in HQ, and then we can see whether it's what we can do about it. On the multiple challenges, it's a very, very complex question, a tough question indeed. I think it's globally, we've been confronted to, succession of crises, which come on top of already pre-existing challenges, such as reaching the SDG, fighting poverty across the world, dealing with the climate crisis. But the acuteness, these crises are becoming more acute, and on top of that, there has been the impact of COVID and the impact of the war in Ukraine, and now the war in the Middle East. So I think that creates, of course, very difficult situation. I think it's important to address them, in a global manner, not to put aside climate because we have other crises. Keeping the momentum and the long-term perspective on climate is absolutely fundamental. And I see that this has been very much discussed in the discussion around the World Bank mandate. And I think that there is no opposition between fighting poverty, or no trade-off between fighting poverty and fighting climate change, because we also know that climate change, if it's not addressed, it will have an impact the strongest impact on the poorest countries. So that all this needs to be addressed at the same time. It's very demanding for global leaders and international organizations, but I think at least at EBRD we're very committed to do our best to contribute to deal with these challenges all together.
Great. Well, I know that we are basically at the end of our time, and I want to ask you one last sort of question, and that's just maybe something a bit more fun, but it's, coming out of this COP, what are you most excited about?
Excited about?
Mm-hmm.
No, I think what was, of course, the discussion, the negotiation, it's also always difficult to see what will be the final outcome and so forth. So, but what I found exciting in all COPs, but in this one particularly, is to have so many people coming together from all over the world, very different background, very different perspective and so forth, but trying to discuss solution for what is a common challenge. And I think the energy coming out of all this panel discussion and so forth is quite amazing. And it really, helped focusing the mind and having, the different perspective and being discussed, sometimes a lot of disagreement, but also I think the common objective shared, and I think that's very positive. And I'm also quite optimistic about the progress made in finding concrete solution. We were talking about renewable and so forth. I think because of the technology is also making progress and will help us in addressing some of these challenges.
Wonderful. Well, Odile, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation and sharing your insights and your work.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to Climate Plus. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it, and you can also leave us a rating or a review. We'll be publishing episodes twice a week in the lead up to, during, and after COP28. So make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast streaming platform. If you want to share some feedback on this episode or have questions you'd like answered, we'd love to hear from you. Drop me a message on X, formerly Twitter, @AlterIgo, or send an email to podcast@devex.com. Climate Plus is a podcast from DevX. Adva Saldinger was the interviewer for today's episode. It was produced and edited by Naomi Mihara. The series editor is Catherine Cheney. It's hosted by me, Michael Igo.